think I've figured out the issue. Apologies for that. Right. Okay, so the UK Community Ownership Fund. So what is the UK Community Ownership Fund? So this is a government fund providing £150 million to enable local communities to own and manage important assets which may otherwise face closure, including cinemas, community centres, pubs and other amenities. So this fund will run for 4 years with a minimum of 8 rounds, and this fund is UK-wide. And funding will be split on a per capita basis, which guarantees a minimum of £12.3 million in Scotland, £7.1 million in Wales, and £4.3 million in Northern Ireland. Matched grants of up to £250,000 for up to 50% of the total capital costs, for example, buying the community asset in question, will be available for most projects. Now, I'm not going to elaborate much more on this, but for certain local institutions like sports clubs, that top figure is actually £1 million, although obviously for us, that's not as relevant. So for most of the projects in scope, it's £250,000. Applications can also be made for up to 20% of the total capital costs, up to a maximum of £50,000 for revenue costs associated with taking ownership of the asset, such as research and development or salaries. So that is money that is associated with taking ownership of the asset. So in that interim period between going from the ownership that it currently exists with to the new group that takes control. So why now? So there's sort of 3 main reasons why the government's bringing forward this now. The first is COVID-19 recovery. So as we move into the recovery phase of the pandemic, there will be a resumed focus on the accessibility to and ownership of community assets. And then the levelling up agenda. So the government is seeking to resume its pre-pandemic domestic policy agenda, in which addressing regional disparity is a key aim. And you may remember from the 2019 election and sort of the subsequent speeches from the government, and actually recent speech from the Prime Minister, levelling up. So addressing this regional disparity is one of the central planks of the government's agenda. And regional disparity in this case means not just economic disparity, but a disparity in terms of quality of life. And finally, improving social cohesion. So as well as that regional disparity I mentioned, the government has identified local social challenges as an important issue which it seeks to address. And the Community Ownership Fund is just one of the interventions that falls under the levelling up umbrella and aims to reverse the damage that's been done to communities through the loss of key local institutions. So the government has set out 4 strategic objectives for the fund. These are: 1, to provide targeted investment for communities to save community assets that would otherwise be lost. 2, to strengthen capacity and capability in community to support them to shape their places and develop sustainable community businesses. 3, to empower communities in left behind places to level up. So that's a strong direct link to the levelling up agenda there. And 4, strengthen direct links between places across the UK and UK government. So the government's not going to and hasn't published an exhaustive list of the potential kinds of projects in scope. And the reason for that is, particularly in this first round, which is open now, it really wants to avoid dissuading or putting off potential applicants by publishing an exhaustive list and accidentally missing out potential projects that might be in scope. However, it expects that projects in scope may include sports and leisure facilities, cinemas and theatres, music venues, museums and galleries, parks, pubs, post office buildings, and shops. So who can apply? Application for fundings will only be accepted from incorporated organisations which are set up to deliver a charitable purpose, social purpose, or public benefit. The legal structures of organisations across the UK that are expected to apply include the following: a charitable incorporated organisation, the Scottish equivalent, cooperatives including community benefit societies, community interest companies, and not-for-profit companies limited by guarantee. To be eligible for funding, applicants will have to demonstrate accountability to the community they represent, how they will operate for the benefit of the wider community, and how they will use the asset to deliver community impact. Profits from the community asset and businesses should be reinvested in the asset to deliver community benefit. So any profits that the business makes after the ownership has been transferred have to be reinvested into the business. It can't be run for profit that is then extracted by the group that takes over. Local authorities and town, parish and community councils will not be eligible to apply, though the government would expect those bodies to be encouraging of bids and supportive in whichever ways they can be. So the application assessment is going to be very similar to most assessments of use of public funds. So the government has some very standardized tests that it needs to be met in order to release public funds. And for the application for the community ownership fund, that's no different. So there are 4 criteria that need to be met in the application to be successful. These are as follows. 1, strategic case. So applicants should show that without intervention, the asset would be lost to the community, the impacts that this loss would have, and the support they have from the community and other partners for the potential takeover of that asset. 2, a management case. So applicants need to show how the objectives and deliverability of the project and how the asset or amenity will be run sustainably. So in many cases, the asset would be a business that could be failing right now or could be losing money. And the management case would need to address how that would be reversed, and so the business could be run in a sustainable way. Often when it's taking over a lease of an asset, that lease would be a minimum of 25 years. So there would need to be some demonstration of how the asset would be run sustainably for that period. The potential to deliver community benefits. So applicants should show how the asset will deliver community benefits under community ownership. And then 4, the added value of the community asset based on community need. So using local data and information on community need, applicants should be able to show the added value of the asset or amenity to the community. And I just add on number 4 that on top of local data, anecdotal data from those within the community is also more than welcome in this part of the assessment criteria. Anecdotal evidence is welcome as well. And I've included in the final slide the detailed assessment criteria guidance and application form. I've also included a link to how to set up a charity were the applicants not currently in the list of potential applicants that I mentioned in the previous slide. So all bids that pass the initial sift will be scored by the Ministry of Housing, Community and Local Government against the assessment criteria. Advice will be sought from devolved administrations and other UK government departments where relevant. So this includes the Department for Digital Culture, Media and Sport on assets that relate to sports, culture, art, tourism and heritage, for example. So the funding for round 1 is as follows. The priorities for the first round are to invest in projects which are already ready to access capital funding and complete their projects within 6 months of applying. So all round 1 bids must be submitted by the 30th of August 2021. And as I mentioned before, there are going to be at least 7 more rounds over the next 4 years. This bidding round will be most suitable for community groups who have done the preliminary work and have a viable business plan to take ownership of the local asset or amenity at risk. For this round of funding, applicants will need to show they are ready to draw down capital funding from the Community Ownership Fund within 6 months of the application. So, as I mentioned, there'll be at least 7 further rounds of funding over the next 4 years. Bidding in future rounds will be more suitable for communities who've identified a local asset at risk but have not yet finalised their business plans. The government may amend criteria for future rounds to ensure greatest reach and impact. So the first round will be for the government somewhat of a test, and depending on take up and how easily potential bidders are able to access the funding, they may slightly amend the criteria to ensure that the maximum or the ideal amount of people can actually reach this fund. And also the government may offer additional support grants early in the process to help understand the viability of applications. So where the first round requires a bid been made, in future, if it's to understand viability, if there is a lack of applicants, then the government may consider adding support grants to help that process. So the second bidding round will open in December 21 and the third in May 2022. The following rounds have not yet been announced, but as I said, there'll be at least 8 in total. And finally, this is just some useful information. So I've included the government's community fund prospectus here. I've included some research on the value of community assets, and that research will be helpful when drawing up the management case. I've included a link on setting up a charity if that's needed or helpful. The assessment criteria guidance is there, and the application form. There's my email address as well, if in case you've got any questions for me. It's gordon.hipwood@bfi.org.uk. And finally, if there are any specific questions relating to the programme that are quite technical, you can go to this MHCLD Community Ownership Fund email address. That's also the email address that you would use to submit your application. Okay, so I'm just going to stop sharing now.
That's great, thank you, Gordon. I've just put your email address in the chat. I hope that's okay. But as I said, we'll send out the prospectus you presented after this meeting. There's a few questions in the chat. I wonder if so Shireen Taylor had asked, are communities defined geographically, or can they be a community of interest? I'm not sure.
So let me just take myself off, or put myself on video rather. So this is a good question. I will revert with answers here, but I think community, I think it would be defined geographically. I'm not sure what the term community of interest means. I think this is a geographical thing, but I will double check that with MHCLG and come back to you on that one.
I can take Shireen off mute if you want her to clarify that for you. Is that useful? Oops, I'm struggling with the technology.
Hey, it's all right. I'm here anyway. I'll take myself off video. Hi. Yes. Hi, Nicola. Yeah, it's a really sort of specific thing because we're in an organisation who've been looking at a building, and we are an arts charity. We're defined as a charity that works for the promotion of the arts and not for the local community. So that's in our constitution. However, we are geographically located in the south side of Glasgow. And we work a lot with the community, but it's not within our sort of defining terms. So when we've looked at community buyout type funds before, we've often been told that we wouldn't be eligible because we are defined as a community of interest, the interest being the arts and cinema and visual arts, as opposed to the specific geographic location that we're based. So that's what I was just interested in, to see if there was any sort of flexibility on that with this.
So I don't hold me to this, but if the asset's within the same community and it's a community asset, then I suspect that you probably would be in scope, but I will need to check that and I will come back to you on that.
Thank you.
Thank you. Oliver had asked, is it Davin had asked about the other 50% of property costs, and that's sort of linked to something we discussed the other day about, am I right in thinking you don't have to have all of the match funding committed when you apply to this fund?
That's right. So the other 50% of the funding is match funding. So it would be the organisation raising that, and the people who can donate money. The list is fairly extensive and include private funders as well as sort of government or local governmental groups or councils. Yes, but it'd be match funding, and yes, you're right, Nicola, to say that you don't necessarily need to have all of the match funding in place when you make the application.
Great, thank you. And Jan Dunn had a question as well. If you could take yourself off mute, Jan.
Hello, yes, I'll also take myself off. There we go, here I am. In the bedroom today because there's children in the house. Yeah, I just wanted to ask, I haven't read the whole of the funding. I only actually found out about the funding a couple of days ago, so I haven't read it all. But if there's a looming deadline right now, and our town, literally our district council has a cabinet meeting tonight where they're going to be deciding about this very specific building we're interested in acquiring through a community asset transfer. We've been in pursuit of it for about 3 or 4 years now, and we've got a huge lot of support from local people. We've just published an open letter with A-list signatories on it from the world of film, theatre and arts, supporting our particular charity getting this building, which is an old rundown cinema that's been closed for quite some time. They're literally having a cabinet meeting tonight to decide whether it's going to be offered out as a community asset transfer or not. If it is, we're kind of ready to start bidding for it, all guns blazing. I don't think we'll have much competition because everybody knows we've been trying to get the building for so long. But I'm just wondering if this looming deadline in August, it's possible to put a small amount of, say, development and feasibility funding application in there and then come back later for a larger amount.
I will check that. I don't think so. I think the first round's pretty strict. The way the first round's described is pretty calcified. I don't think there's much wiggle room. For future rounds, you know, the government has given itself the room to potentially do these things, but it hasn't committed to definitely doing them. So for money to help with feasibility studies, even in the prospectus, it doesn't say it will definitely do it. It says it basically reserves the right to do it.
So would we be scuppering ourselves if we applied for a small amount in 2 weeks' time and then a much fuller amount when we're actually in the building in situ?
To be honest, I don't think I can answer that. I don't think I can answer that here, to be perfectly honest.
Okay. I think that's a decision for yourself, Jan, I'm afraid. Stefan, if you want to go ahead, you were asking about.
Yes, we're a social enterprise in Carnarvon, North Wales. We've identified a section or a street, if you like, of derelict buildings. Is it a case of, would we be allowed to make an application per property, or is it an individual one shot for one property?
That's a good question. Are those buildings, are they under, when you say the derelict, are they under the control of the same, are they adjoining? I'm not sure if that even. Yeah, I think that's one. I think that it's one asset per application, is my understanding.
But there's,
although if you,
sorry, is there a clause that we can't make multiple applications per property?
Multiple applications, so you would apply for the same property more than once?
No. If there's 4 properties in this street, for example, that's been empty for a decade, if we were to have a proposal for plans for each of the properties to bring them back to life, would we be allowed to make an application per kind of individual property? Versus
just one application that included all of them? Okay. I will check that, because I'm not 100% sure on the answer to that, because the prospectus is written really talking in the singular when it talks to assets. It's not really talking about a number of them, but I will find out and revert back to you.
Okay. Raphael had asked, I think, a similar question, but it's more about if things have already been privatized.
Yes. Sorry. Yes, the question was assets that were already lost to the community, let's say a post office or maybe a pub that had been in private hands for a while, and now they become available to purchase again, if they would be eligible for this community fund.
When you say become available, do you mean you've got word, or you know that the people who own that asset are seeking to sell it?
Yes.
I think possibly is the answer, but I should add that assets that provide statutory functions, for example, education services, social care services, are not in scope of this fund. That's just a bit of something I should have mentioned in the presentation. I will check on that, because it may well be a legal distinction, and that if it's no longer a community asset at risk and has become a private asset, whether that changes the application process, I'm not sure. I think that the example you're highlighting would be in scope, but I will have to double check.
Thank you.
So maybe just take one more question. Lara Hewitt had asked about if your first application is unsuccessful, are you allowed to go back to future rounds, Gordon?
I'm not sure of the answer, so apologies, I'm not sure of the answer here. And that's a question that might be worth putting to the MHCLG email address as well, because they can help support you through the application process. So it might be worth getting in touch with them directly and saying this is what you intend to do and finding out what their view is on that.
Okay, great. And is there we'll just maybe squeeze in James's question. Is there a timescale that the acquired asset can run at a loss?
I'm not sure. Again, that's a good question, and I'm not sure the answer to that. Obviously, you can apply for revenue fund to kind of bridge things like salary costs, for example, up to 20% of the capital fund that you're bidding for. But I think that obviously the business case that shows how it's going to be run sustainably in the long run is the key thing here. If you can demonstrate that the business can be turned around and run sustainably, then that is probably the thing that will be most important to MHCLG.
Great. It's obviously, we were talking before that it's written in very plain English, but it's obviously, like most things, quite complicated under the surface when you start picking away. So
yeah. I can answer Sean's question as well quickly if that is helpful.
Yeah, on you go.
So the 50% of the asset is the spend for basically the infrastructure, the equipment, the building. But 20%, up to 20% of that figure that you're bidding for can be applied for to help with those kind of salary costs for that period where you're transferring ownership. So it's on top of, it's not part of the 50% that you're bidding.
Great. Any last questions? Okay. So I'll copy the questions that have been asked in the chat and forward them to you, Gordon.
Thank you very much.
I'll share Gordon's presentation with everyone who requested to take part in this session. I hope that's been useful. Oh, Raphael's got one more question. Have you got time?
It's a very quick one, and I almost know the answer. But if an asset will feed a community benefit, but it hasn't been a community asset before, can we apply for this obviously included in a project that will benefit the community?
I would check with MHCLG, but I mean, just thinking it through, for example, pubs are in scope, as mentioned before, and pubs are not necessarily publicly owned assets, they're privately owned assets. So so long as you can demonstrate that it has a benefit to the community, then potentially yes.
Okay, thank you very much. Sorry.
You're welcome.
Great. Okay. Anything else you'd like to add, Gordon, before we?
I don't think so. What I will say is I will take away these questions that I've not answered or have answered with a little asterisk and try and get some clarity on those for you as soon as I can. And of course, if you've got any further questions just on how this kind of interrelates with the applications you're seeking to go through, please don't hesitate to get in touch. Obviously, on the technical aspects of the application process, the MHCLG email address is probably the best place to go as first port of call. But please get in touch if you need to.
Great. Thank you so much for your time and for going through this. It's a really good opportunity for communities. So really appreciate that. Okay, thanks everyone for giving up your time this afternoon. I hope that's been useful. Stop recording.